One Israel Fund, beating to the rhythm of the heartland, enhancing and securing daily life in the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria for over 25 years. Join us and make a difference. Hi, everybody. Eve Harow, Director of Tourism and Community Development for One Israel Fund, who is sponsoring tonight's programming. If you're not familiar with One Israel Fund, so I'll just tell you a little bit about what we do. For over 25 years, we have worked very hard to enhance the lives of Jews living in Judea and Samaria, and at one point in Gaza as well, dispersing millions of dollars for security, for mikvaot, for playgrounds, for whatever the needs are, filling in the gaps in the communities. So if you're someone for whom it's important that we strengthen the presence of the Jews in our heartland, then be in touch with me, Eve at oneisraelfund.org, and we'll see what we can do to partner together. So I want to thank you all for joining us on tonight's webinar. We've had a few in the last few months, and if you missed them, can't believe you had other things to do, you can see them. They are on our Facebook site, and we can also email them to you. And I'm very happy tonight to be with two of my favorite gentlemen, I would say, who need no introduction, but I'll introduce them anyhow, because that's the format of what you're supposed to do. Dr. Harold Rhode is widely recognized as one of the world's, oh, the heck with vanity, hang on a second, as one of the world's foremost experts on Islamic culture. He worked in the Office of the U.S. Department of Defense for 28 years as an advisor of Islamic, Iranian, Turkish, and Arab affairs, and traveled and studied extensively throughout the Islamic world. Since retiring in 2010, he devotes his time to educating Westerners on how Muslims see the non-Muslim world and why war will continue until we all convert, willingly or not, by any means possible, to Islam. But we can prevail. That is the very short version of his biography. And the other, this went out, okay, Marc Provisor is an Israeli internationally recognized security consultant on counter-terror mitigation. He coordinated all military and civilian security-related matters at ground level as the Chief Army Security Coordinator in the Greater Shiloh, that's in the Shomron region, from 1996 to 2006, which, as we all recall, were some very difficult years, earning the Award of Excellence and Valor from the IDF Central Command General. Provisor has provided counsel to the United States Department of Homeland Security, among others, and lectures widely. He is One Israel Fund's Director of Security Projects, and his extensive involvement protecting Jewish communities in Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza region has been credited with saving countless lives. So when I organized the program a few days ago, what I wanted to talk about was what these two men are experts in, both coming to similar conclusions about the Islamic world, but from very, very different spheres and experience. But then, as luck would have it, we had the news a few days ago that the United Arab Emirates is going to be having a peace treaty, normalizing ties with Israel, something that is still going to frame a topic that we're going to discuss tonight, but we're going to discuss it within the framework of what these two men have gone through and how they see the coming events, the coming normalization, if you will. So I'd like to start with Dr. Harold Rhode. So Harold, you have many friends in the Arab world. The Islamic world is obviously not the same thing, but we'll just conflate them for now. And I assume that you have been in touch with them. They've been in touch with you over the last few days with this big news. What do they say? What are their feelings? And these are not people that are tweeting. These are not people that are being interviewed. These are people that you know, who shall remain nameless, whom you trust, we've known for a long time. And what is their feeling on this event?
Well, let's take the UAE, Bahrain, Oman, and what we can learn from the Saudis. And it's a very, very positive development. I do actually want to bring up a video of a Saudi guy who spoke about the Palestinians. He said, "You're a fake nation." You can see this on the net, and I think, Eve, I've sent you. If anybody's interested, you're most welcome to send it out. He speaks in Arabic. There is an English and Hebrew translation below it. And it says, you're not real Arabs, you're a bunch of, and he names all sorts of people who landed there from time immemorial. And he said, in Al-Aqsa, he said, look, go back to our earliest sources. Al-Aqsa is not Jerusalem. It means the furthest mosque. It is 29 kilometers from Mecca. And that it's a place in there, it's called Taif. And there's the furthest mosque and the nearer mosque, which was closer than 29 kilometers. They're fake, they're not a people. He said they're even fake Muslims. Whether in fact it's true, that's their business. I'm not here to define what Muslims are. Let me tell you that in the last 2 days, I probably spent more talking with people in Oman, in the UAE, in Bahrain, people that I'm again known. In a month, I'm going to be 71 years old, and I've been doing this since I'm 14 years old. So these are long-standing relations. These are not relations I've had since I'm 14 years old, but at least, let's say, at least 30, 40, 50 years. It's a long time. And I want to bring this back to the thing which matters for this webinar on Judea and Samaria, and how they understand the treaty. First of all, they're unbelievably excited about it. He said, we're great traders with a D. And Israelis, got all this high-tech stuff. We got the connections. We know we will be magnificent together. And what do they say about the people in Judea and Samaria? And it's fascinating. First of all, the people in Judea and Samaria are saying, using the word kha'in. Kha'in means an Arabic traitor, calling the UAE people traitors. Well, in Islam, or in the Islamic world, calling someone a traitor, and Erdogan, if Turkey has also called the UAE traitors, when you say traitor, the next thing is you can be sacrificed, you can be killed. Obviously, the Gulfies don't want to be killed. They loathe, to put it mildly, by and large, the Palestinians. And let me tell you also a little bit about I have a very good friend in, shall we say, one of the royal establishments. I know him when he was a student. That's, again, many, many years ago. And he's talking about his own country, which is Oman. He said, we should have been first, we the Omanis. We should have, 25 years ago, 40 years ago, we should have already had a peace treaty with Israel. And so here they are fighting about who should be first. Now, when the Palestinians are calling them traitors, how do they see it? And this is very interesting because it brings it back to Yudav Shimon, Judea, Samaria. And that is, look, they're saying, guys, you have the Trump plan, accept it and join the process. Here's your chance. You've missed many before. If you do it now, you know where you can go. In other words, it looks like from the plan or the agreement with Israel, and I had nothing to do with the negotiations, and so I have no idea what the reality is, except I do know what people who are close to the political establishments in these countries are saying, and that is, look, it's enough already. You guys are the real traitors to the Muslim cause. Then here's your chance. If you screw it up, goodbye, we don't want to hear anymore. Now, why do the PA and Hamas leaders, why are they so opposed to this? It's a very simple reason why. Is that historically, in Islam, if you make an agreement with a non-Muslim and give Islamic territory, and from their point of view, that is the Palestinians, whatever point of view, the Muslims by and large is what matters. If you make an agreement where you give up Islamic territory, and that is defined as anything which is ever conquered by Muslims will remain Muslim forever. If you give up this territory, if you say, that Israel, the Jews have a right to their own state, you see what I just did, you will be slaughtered. Sadat did that, and a year or two later was killed for having dared to have made an agreement, even if it's a temporary agreement. Temporary agreements are fine in Islam, and temporary can be forever.
So let me ask you, Harold. Let me just ask you, because you've written books and you lecture widely on the idea that for the jihadists, there's no such thing as really making peace with anyone. Okay, you have to be a Muslim. So
They're
are you
not one type of Muslim either. They don't talk with other Muslims.
So are you saying here that the pragmatic element in the Arab world is winning out? Or, and I'd like you to answer this directly, because then I want to go to Mark and ask him a very pinpoint question. Or is this just a ploy? Is this part of the bigger long-term game of having Israel, put our defenses down, feel that we're being accepted into the region, perhaps provide weaponry, which is something that's been discussed in the last couple of days in the news, that there's some deals afoot here, weapons that wouldn't have been sold will now be sold. Or do you feel that they really think, and based on your knowledge of your friends in these areas, that they really said it's enough? We're not interested in the Palestinian issue. That's not going to stop us from having relationships with Israel. They've got a lot to offer: water desalination, high technology, whatever it is. And they're not Muslims. They're not Muslims. We don't really care. This is another level. What are you gleaning from what they're saying? Is this a real deal, or it's just part of? Sometimes I feel like we're just all being manipulated. Is it part of that?
Well, there is a great Middle East correspondent in Israel by the name of Tzvi Yechezkeli.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses this phrase that he learned from Arabs: there's the truth and there is its brother. And what that means is that there's the truth, and when I need it, I'll invent the new truth. It has nothing to do with real truth. We in the West, we want to prove things. We want to know what are the facts. The facts don't matter. If I need to call someone else a non-Muslim, that's okay. If I am a Muslim and claim that he is. And that's how they handle it. Remember, though, the following: all agreements between Muslims and non-Muslims, by definition in Islam, are temporary. How long is temporary? It could be temporary number 1, number 2, number 3. It could be 10 years. I can give you, we won't go into the details. There's a treaty of Hudaybiyah that their prophet, the Muslim prophet Muhammad, signed supposedly for 10 years with some of his enemies, which when he got strong and 2 years later, he eliminated his enemies. That's what Arafat did.
I think I got the answer that
Okay.
you're alluding
You know
to.
me, I have too much to say.
Okay, so I want to speak to Mark as somebody who has a lot of skin in this particular game. I live in Yehuda. Mark lives in the Shomron. For us, this is not some theoretical discussion on the editorial pages or some stocks and bonds that we can now make some money. Mark's youngest daughter of his children just went into the army 2 weeks ago. We live here. Most of the people who we care about on the top of our list are in these areas. What are you thinking, Mark, about the reaction of the Palestinian Authority, of the people in the Palestinian Authority to this deal? Because they may be calling the UAE people traitors, but they're not going to be able to go and bomb the UAE. But what they might want to do is start some kind of uprising or some kind of violence against us or against Israel in general, or even beyond, as a way of getting the attention back to them. Because if they feel now that they've been humiliated, they've been relegated to the side, they're not important anymore, discussions are going to happen even if they're not happy. What are we going to be feeling here on the ground? Because that is your area of expertise, is keeping people here safe. Are you anticipating some kind of, rumble, if you will, in the near future because of this?
First, I think it's very important to see what Harold said about temporary can be forever, because we're actually watching on the street a classic misunderstanding between Western thought and Islamic thought. And when I'll say Islamic, I mean in the Arab world, okay? It's like a tadhiyah, it's really temporary. And first of all, that's the way the UAE, they know that, the entire Arab nations know the way it is, that nothing is forever, but they're saying opportunity right now to reap some of the benefits of this. Absolutely, they'll gain more power within the Arab world. Basically, if we go back around local history, the Mukhtarim the mayors of their villages, they gained power by bringing good to their people, and they got that. Regarding, so first of all, in a dynamic, in a regional outlook, look, I'm very glad that people are smiling, happy together. We'll be flying long term. Who knows? On the ground here, though, as like you are saying, we are seeing obviously the Arabs of Judea and Samaria, of Fatah and Hamas, basically, yes, using the word traitors and so on. And what they will do as a ploy is, I'm preparing for violence. We're working to strengthen a lot of the weaker places because of a certain reason. If we look at the UAE, you see about 11% of their entire population are people from the UAE. The rest are foreign workers. And this is happening actually throughout Bahrain, throughout Saudi, and all these places. And a lot of the foreign workers happen to be what they call like the villagers, falahim, really, that are coming in from other Arab nations to make a bit of a living. These are the simple folk. They will run after whatever fanatic comes up. So the chance happens is that if the PLO and Hamas, and to me, they're actually one and the same, they would make violence to prove that the Jews then are fighting the Muslims. They're not going to take it and say a territorial thing. The Jews are killing Muslims. Now, when your regular Falah gets this, or whatever branch of a Muslim Brotherhood exists in the other countries, it'll start churning, and that could lead to, as Harold mentioned, to the assassinations of their leaders, which the Arab, not just the Emirates, all those guys, they are afraid. So we're watching it very carefully to see how it's going to go, because I personally think they're going to try to increase the violence here to get an Israeli reaction, and do. I mean, I don't think we should hold back anything. So it's interesting. So the whole dynamic will be interesting. It's, in the Arab world, this is all a game. And this is a game that's been played for millennia. And this is simply the way it will continue over here. Again, the possibility for peace, I'm very happy about it. I don't think it is long-term. It will serve, it's as long as it serves their interests. And we have to see the way the game is played out here. Everything is open right now. But like I said, I'm preparing for it.
So the point that you make about this being turned not so much a territorial issue as a Muslim issue, we could already see that they were talking today about the Temple Mount, okay, which even though Israel technically controls, really doesn't. And there's a lot of tension always on the Temple Mount, and hearing some of the representatives of the Palestinian Arabs saying that whoever is it from a country that's made a treaty with Israel is not going to be allowed to come up and pray on the Temple Mount. So what you're saying, they're already throwing that in there as a religious issue.
Right, but again, okay, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask you about Gaza, because in addition to also doing what you can to secure people in Judea and Samaria, you've also gotten involved in the last few years in the Gaza envelope and what has happened since after the so-called disengagement, the expulsion from Gaza, and a lot of the rockets and shootings that have been happening. And of course, every summer, the fires. And now that started up again within the last few days. Is that a coincidence? It's no. August, it's time to burn the Jewish fields.
It's not a coincidence.
It's not.
It's definitely not a coincidence. It's also connected to the Qatari money. But again, there are things, again, the dynamic. And one of the reasons it's very funny, whereas Harold and I are both coming from different areas, everything that he's saying, I've seen on the ground level here translated maybe a little different. For even years, even during the Intifada, when, I was a lot of relations with the Arabs, my neighbors and so on. And I watched those who said, you know what, it's better that we work with the Jews. They're going to get better conditions, things are going to work out better and so on. And of course, they had more of a problem that their leaders were against it. And those also, I knew that they couldn't necessarily be trusted this is before the Intifada. And of course, the minute the opportunity raised itself, they were on the other side of the gun shooting. So a lot of these things, it's just important for people to understand the dynamics of what goes on in this part of the woods. It does not go according to Western ideology. It is something that you have to be in. You have to. It's dynamic. It's extremely interesting for those who like it. So people who are going to try to make sense of what may come about, give it a rest. It's not going to go according to anything. Now, regarding Gaza, of course, it started with the Qatari money, but then it started when the news started coming out about the UAE, and obviously we're seeing other nations seeing more rioting on the borders and everything, trying to provoke more of an Israeli reaction. It will go up and down. And what's interesting, when you mentioned the temple mount, I want to see the first mishlachat, the first
Delegation.
delegation from the UAE come up to the Temple Mount, because that will be interesting. Because if they come in there and all of a sudden there's a chikuch, a rumble, if you will, it would be very interesting the way that actually affects the Arab world, because then it's going to be a real power play.
But my concern is that somehow Israel's always going to get blamed.
We're going to get blamed. Don't worry. We're going to get blamed. We're going to be hit and all that. Yes. Don't think that of course, it's our fault. Start from there. Yeah.
So 2 days ago, I was in the Old City doing a review course with other tour guides, since there are no tourists here. So I was there near Lion's Gate for about 2.5 hours. We were talking about some ancient pool that was there from the temple times. Tour guides can stand in one place and talk for 2.5 hours about an ancient pool. And there were some border policemen there. And of course, today we heard about that a border policeman was actually stabbed by a terrorist. They managed to kill the terrorist. And of course, we're all wishing the border policeman a full recovery. So even when it's quiet, there's always this it's quiet until it's not quiet anymore. And you know that from many years of experience in the area. We talk about, I want to ask you something, Harold, about the difference between leaders and people. Those of us who live in democratic countries, including Israel, and I would imagine most of the people who are watching this now, we just kind of, to a great degree, conflate what the leaders do with the people's will. Not always, right? It's getting very divided, but in a democracy, so the majority ruled. And when we're dealing with the Middle East, there's a lot of times when people will say something about a country, but the people might feel completely differently than the policy that the country is doing. And you have told me repeatedly, especially vis-a-vis Iran, that as horrible as the Iranian leadership is now, as bloodthirsty and of course wanting to destroy Israel and other countries as well, which is, many pundits saying now, one of the major reasons why the UAE is joining up with Israel in order to have be protected from Iran, from which, from the Shias from whom they're afraid. But you've told me over the years that the Iranian people are not at one with their leadership, and not just Iran. So their policies that these countries take, and the people are not necessarily behind it. But we've also seen it in the reverse, that Jordan and Egypt signed peace agreements with Israel, but because the people weren't invested in it, it's a very cold peace, if you can call it peace at all. Very little tourism back and forth or relations. So how do you see in this particular case, this idea playing out? Because you have a strong man running the the Emirates. It's
very different. It's very, very different from the Palestinian case, from Yehud Shimon. And that is because most of the Emirates are one tribe. And the leader, they're not dictators per se. They build consensus. And by and large, and I've seen this over and over again, people, they don't hate their leaders. The Palestinians, again, going back to Yechezkeli, interviewing people about the Trump plan, they were really happy. They wanted to be Israeli citizens, because what it is they understand that Israel is powerful. The reality is that Israel is not going away, and they can get a lot of benefits from it. The Gulfies understand the same thing, that Israel is strong. Please understand the idea of of being strong is extremely important. And I would say there are certain forces in Israel, and they're a very small group, but they are very vocal and they own the media and academics, who think that by Israel giving in, it's going to be, oh, that's the way to get peace and all that. In the Middle East, the moment you appear weak in any way, they go after you. Please, the business of when I said before about leaders and not the way the Palestinians or so-called leaders are acting, their model is Arafat. Arafat was offered almost all of the West Bank, to which he started to shake, and not Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton writes about it in his book. He said, I will not have people Sadat. What does that mean? Sadat gave in and accepted in some form Israel, and he got killed for it. That won't happen to me. And these leaders, they will be shamed. They will be the ones responsible for giving in on territory which belongs to the Muslims. That is Judea and Samaria from a Muslim point of view. And that is why those so-called leaders, you're talking about Abu Mazen, you're talking about whoever the latest nut, whatever terrorist that's running Gaza. These people can't give in, because they will therefore be saying, it's over, we accept that Israel has a right to be here, and they will, as a result, get killed. They'll get assassinated. The Gulfi leaders aren't really worried so much about that. They're about being assassinated, because by and large, most of them run things. And the Saudi situation is even more interesting. The Saudis are Wahhabis. They're very different from the Muslim Brotherhood. Why are they different? In Wahhabism, if you are suffering in life, it's because you are not following Allah's way, and you deserve to suffer. Which means if you have what we would call in the West a tyrant as a leader, you deserve it. And that's one of the ways they keep themselves in power. This is the Wahhabi philosophy.
You know, we're seeing something interesting though happening though in Yudan and Shimron right now. Because first of all, you know, when the Gulf states, and this can even take it back to Egypt and Jordan for that matter, you know, they made peace with Israel. I mean, they accepted a reality, and the reality of that Israel, whether it's sovereignty or not, that we exist in Yudan and Shimron. We're there, we're building, and so on. And now the Gulf states are simply making peace, and they're basically saying, we accept that reality. All right, they're playing semantics with words, whether it's sovereignty, whatever, that's up for the politician. Now, in the Palestinian street, and to take it back to Tzvi Yechezkeli, what he said, a lot of them are saying, my God, these main people, the powerhouses of the Arab world are accepting this. What's going on? They're not looking necessarily, the Palestinian leadership, I hate using the word Palestinian, they're calling them the traitors. The Arab leadership, the Islamic leadership in Israel is calling them the traitors. But the people on the street who are very different, and again, we're talking about leaders and people, different status, and applies all over. They're looking at it and saying, if these people, this powerhouse of the Arab nations, these powerhouses of the Arab nations are accepting this reality, wait a second. Maybe there is something to it. Maybe that our leaders, a lot of them, look, they're also, that here the people are afraid to speak peace because they will get killed. And remember, as much as Lily, whatever, progressive liberals all over the world want to speak for the Palestinians, they're not going to come and protect them. They don't really care about them. So you're having another dynamic happening here. We're saying, what's going on? They don't necessarily feel betrayed because they've been betrayed by their own leaders already. This is going to create, you know, we spoke about just the violence between the Arabs and the Jews in Israel, Yudan, Shimron, or Gaza, wherever you want. By the way, there's just some red alerts. I don't know whether it's actual rockets hit. There's also the danger of them fighting amongst themselves. Because if there is an oppressed people, the oppressors are the PLO and Hamas. And so now you have a different dynamic coming in. Meaning, if we look at Gaza, right? By the way, someone asked about the Gazan envelope. What does that mean? The Gazan border communities. If we look over there, a lot of the people in Gaza are, yes, totally oppressed by their own. I mean, forget it. They could have had an incredible life had they not decided to throw rockets on Israel 3 days after we left. One of the reasons a lot of these people have never risen against their own leaders, because there was no support. There was really no support network. People, the left, people who aligned themselves with the left really weren't going to go out there, put their body in there. But now, the Gulf states present another problem. These people might not only get financial support, logistic, who knows what. The Arab leadership in Yudan, Shomron, and Gaza is also afraid of the people rising against them. And again, this is the game where, you know, it's very interesting. That's why we have to watch it day by day. Anyone who's going to tell you what's going to happen in the future doesn't have an idea what he's talking about. Because again, to take it back, it is all temporary, but things can change day by day. And from the security standpoint, what we have to do, or at least in a sense what I'm doing, is working to take that chance. Expecting the worst, hoping for the best. But it's a major dynamic happening. Violence sort of has to break out because that's just what they do. How and when will be the interesting answer.
Well, it seems clear that when Mahmoud Abbas is off the stage, dies or is killed or whatever happens to him, then there will be some kind of power vacuum and power struggle in Yehuda v'Shomron, and that the Hamas is going to try and take over as they did in Gaza, take over from the PA, and there'll be a lot of internal fighting. That seems to be inevitable. Whether this particular issue with the UAE is going to kick it off or not would be the interesting question before that even happens. Because
I'm curious to see who the Europeans are going to support.
Yeah, should we put bets on that? Look, if the Europeans
have already a bit condemned the UAE for this.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
Which really outs them. Which really outs them as not so much wanting there to be peace as wanting to annihilate Israel in their own way. All right, if you can't have a BDS movement that is trying to punish Israel for something, and then have Israel, still having relationships with the countries around us, then they just they're outed, the Europeans, for what they really are, which is not wanting people to live here in peace.
For what this is worth, the JNS.org had an article today of the Jewish community in Abu Dhabi and in the UAE. It was fascinating. The European Jews who live there, they're between 1,000 and 2,000 Jews. There are at least 3 synagogues, and very government protected and all that. And the European Jews say very clearly, we feel much more secure here than we do in Europe. Because Europe is turning not only against the Jews, turning against Israel. Europe is internally turning against itself, which is maybe not a bad idea. Mm-hmm. If they're not going to go back to their original, their identity as Christians, it's not good.
So I wanted to ask both of you, because you mentioned that there's a Jewish community in Abu Dhabi, and a lot of people that probably came as quite a surprise. Many of us do know businessmen who've been going in and out, Israeli businessmen. Yeah. Into a lot of the Arab countries, doing business over the years. I have a friend who is an expert in dates, in growing dates, and for many, many years already, he lives in Israel. On his American passport, he's been going into one of the Arab countries that does not have relations with Israel, because there's someone very wealthy there who's got a date plantation and wants an expert to take care of it. Knows very well that this friend of mine lives in Israel, and they play that game. So the question is, if this was going on anyway, and it was kind of with a wink and a nod, why did there need to be a formal announcement like this? What gain could there be? And one of the ideas that's come up is that this is connected to the American elections. That the UAE, I'll just throw this out, it's something that I was listening to today, that the UAE wants Trump to win because they feel that it's the best protection against Iran. And therefore, they kind of gave him this gift in a few months before the American elections to up his standing, because otherwise we just could have continued with this kind of cloak and dagger thing for a long time. So, Harold, what's your feeling on that? And then Mark the same.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to make this short. Believe it or not, I mean, I understand that view, and there are ways of Israelis have a tendency to see everything in Israeli terms. I assume the person who wrote this is Israeli, but it's not necessarily true. Here's why. You have, if you notice, what is the big thing that America is talking about throughout the world? It's China, China, China. And it is China, and China has got this agreement, or is negotiating this agreement, basically to make Iran a province of China. And that scares everybody. But here's what the Americans are doing. Look, they're going around the world, talking to everybody, and knitting together this alliance. And it's America, Australia, Japan, India, Israel. You remember the first trip that Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State Pompeo, came to during this Wuhan virus COVID period is to Israel. And he talked, as far as I know, about two subjects. One is the China thing, and one is the Iran thing. And if you notice that when he came, 2 days later, I think Israel gave out a contract on an additional desalination plant. The Chinese were behind one whatever bit of thing, and all of a sudden it was always cheaper. China's always cheaper. That's how they get in everywhere, and it's also not the best work that they perform. All of a sudden, it's an Israeli company that is being given the thing. I am saying that the UAE and Israel are part of the American alliance here against the Chinese, basically using the classic Chinese Sun Tzu view of the world. You want to take over the world, but not by military means if you can. And that's what they're doing. Israel is essential because Israel and America, the Israel cyber abilities are awesome. I don't even know what cyber is to really discuss it, but it really matters. And the UAE is in the same boat. It is very clearly in the American camp. Is there also this, that it helps Trump? God willing, it helps Trump as far as I'm concerned.
You don't.
I don't believe that's.
You don't believe it helps
That's the only reason. No, I think it's the Israelis have a problem. Look, we Jews tend to think in terms of ourselves, and we don't understand. Israel now is a very powerful country. I would say one of the most powerful on the face of the earth. Jews have a problem with power. They don't understand what to do with it. It's like, oh my God, all the time, whatever happens, oh, they're going to kill us. Now Israel is a Jewish state and is unbelievably powerful. And I don't think the Jews have made that transition to understand how unbelievably important and powerful they are to the United States, to India. I mean, I just spent, again, pre-COVID, I was in India for 3 weeks and all that, and I was really interested in understanding how they understand Israel. They and Israel have the same problem. They're Muslims, unfriendly Muslims, and inside the country who really want to take them over. You see, there's commonality. The Japanese have real problems with the Chinese. Now, I understand this is a program, this is a webinar which deals with Judea and Samaria. I'm saying that Israel is part of this unbelievable alliance. The UAE is too. And again, I'm not denying that the Trump re-election thing is important, but I don't think that's the sine qua non for the whole thing. Sorry, Mark, what do you think?
Mark, what's your opinion on that? Does this have to do with the American elections?
I think everything has to do with politics. Very simple. I mean, I think that if Trump and Pompeo, obviously there are a lot of things that are happening, and Bibi didn't notify Gantz on these things. Everything has to do with politics, the elections and power. Absolutely. But, there was one issue in the sense that we're talking about the UAE agreement and so on, and obviously with One Israel Fund and Judea and Samaria, that people were asking, how do the residents of Judea and Samaria also feel about this? I think it's very important that most people realize that the residents of Judea and Samaria do not have one voice. They are diverse as everybody. No, people forget, where they're looking for, there's so many different opinions and so on. So everyone has their own opinion. And again, even I was asked personally, they said, how do you feel about it? Anything that can stop violence or to put it off a little bit, hey, I'm for. Very simple. And the simple fact that they're getting, that they are, that this is hurting the leadership of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas works for me. Very, very easy. To take it back on the politics thing, again, yes, I think this is a lot of games and so on, and these are the things that we see. Sure, Trump pulled this. I don't know whether it's going to help him in the American elections, or if you're following what's going on in the States. Bibi is the Trump card here. We watched the numbers go up when this was announced, and of course now we're hearing, Oman being upset that they weren't number one, and Bahrain and Sudan, who we've been talking to, and people are speculating about Saudi Arabia. I think the average is, I think within a month, if all of a sudden these nations start having peaceful negotiations or whatever with Israel, I think that will affect our elections. Whether it will affect the American elections, I don't think so. I think they're going through a lot of interesting stuff back there. And again, you're talking about, remember, a lot of the anti-Israel movements where there are Muslim Americans involved and so on, this is going to confuse the hell out of them. It's like, wait a second, why are there so many Muslims now wanting to make peace with Israel? What's going on? So this is going to create chaos, and I think that's great. I mean, I personally thrive in it, and again, it should be interesting. That's my thought on that with the politics and everything. I have a luxury. My luxury is that I don't have to think, unless I want to, about the world and the politics. I try to really focus on what's going on here on the ground and really keeping people safe and alive so that they can argue. That's a good sign. When we can argue, we're alive. That's a good thing.
So many of the people watching this may not realize that the paintings behind you are yours. And all you really want to do is put on a smock and paint every day and not do what you have to do. But the paintings behind you are very pastoral and very beautiful. A lot of them are the landscapes of Yuda v'Shomron. But I've seen other paintings of yours that are far less quieting for the soul. Paintings of arenas.
You think?
Yeah. Paintings of arenas and people being killed. And the sense of all these big powers that be in making decisions, and ultimately little people are the ones, like in the gladiator games, little people are the ones down on the field who are paying the price and end up going to war, and people losing their loved ones because of awful decisions that other people made for reasons that weren't necessarily pure. And so I'd like to bring up just to get away from the UAE for a second and talk about another big event that happened in the last couple of weeks in an area that you were pretty familiar with in 1982, and that was Beirut, where you were as a young paratrooper in your army service during, of course, the first Lebanon war that we had there in '82. And that is an ongoing issue, our northern neighbor, Lebanon, and the Muslim-Christian internecine war that's been going on there, and Hezbollah taking over, and the ineffective abilities of the southern Lebanese army. You've also occasionally get up to the northern border, speak to some of the security people up there, which has been, it's not been in the news so much in the last couple of days, but just a couple of weeks ago, there were issues up on the northern border. So what are you thinking about what's happening there? Is that tremendous explosion, and let's leave aside what the explosion was, and was it as reported, let's just leave that for a minute, that flattened a good part of Beirut. Do you think that ultimately that will lessen the dangers that we're going to have from Hezbollah, because Lebanon is in such chaos and sick and poor, and these people are really suffering? Or once again, all that anger and frustration is somehow going to come out in our direction?
Well, again, we're looking at the conflict, as Harold also mentioned, the various axes that you have. You have the Gulf states and those people who are an open eye towards Israel. Then you have the Iranian axis, which is part of Hezbollah, obviously, is part of it. And who's going to be shot at will be Israel in any attempt actually to fire up the area. But it's interesting, and I guess you have to be my age, at least, to remember this. I'm looking at a repetition of history. And what was the saying? Those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat it. pre pre the first Lebanese war. So the southern part of Lebanon was known as Fatah land. And Fatah was ruling there pretty much, oppressing the people, in total control and so on. And this is why what you had is when the Israeli troops went in, I mean, I remember it, going in and we're driving in our APCs or in our Jeeps and they're throwing rice at us and rose water. And they were ecstatic that they looked at us as liberators. Of course, we screwed it up by staying around too long. And I'm watching that again today. Now it's Hezbollah land. They're controlling it. It's the same thing. They have, just like Fatah had Lebanon in a Hanika.
Chokehold.
In a
chokehold. Just how they had them in a chokehold back then. Hezbollah has Lebanon again in a chokehold, and they would love to be free from that. We're watching the burning of effigies of Nasrallah and so on. But of course, look, the big danger here is, and this comes about with the opportunity, and again, I'm referring back to the things that Harold's actually mentioned regarding the Arab world. They wait for opportunity. Now, if all of a sudden the opportunity comes up and that Iran, who is really run by a bunch of lunatics, and this is not the Iranian people, decide to start doing things, and Hezbollah, if this front opens on us, and you have to remember Syria, you left out Syria. Syria is a mess.
Yeah.
Syria, you have 5 major terror groups operating over there. And then you have Hamas, and all of a sudden if they decide to open up a front on Israel, and if the Arabs of Judea and Samaria make that major mistake too, then I'm a little bit more afraid. And the reason being that all of a sudden, in any land that was freed and taken over by Muslims remains that forever. And again, we have the concept of temporary. What happens all of a sudden if these people feel that they have a chance to win? This is what we saw in the Intifada. Who would have thought back in 2000, when we're having joint patrols and everything looks like la-di-da, kumbaya, that all of a sudden, one day, everything changes, because all of a sudden they thought they had a chance to defeat Israel.
Mm-hmm.
This constantly exists within the Arab world. This also will relate to those that say Israel sold out our honor by making an agreement with the UAE, which I don't necessarily agree with. We have to remain extremely, extremely strong. Not just militarily, boots on the ground, but also the way we act. We're not talking the West. We're not talking about making nice and this and like in the Arab world, they have to realize that we're strong and that we're here to stay. And as long as we play that, we will have peace. And that means not adapting a Western ideology towards them. The reason that they all supported Trump, by the way, and people forget this, because the previous administration, Barack Obama, he went to the Muslim Brotherhood. He went to their extremes and ignored their leaders and wanted them to dictate his way, his Western ideology of democracy on the Arab world, which was unacceptable. Trump comes in, and I'm not saying whether I'm for or against it, I'm not playing politics here. Trump comes in and says, I don't care the way you run your country. Do whatever you want. This is the business I want to deal with. And that's the reason why they respected him and why they still do, because they don't want to be, in a sense, messed with. It will be, I'm hoping that our politicians in Israel will be smart enough to realize that semantics, where some might figure it's just semantics or a headline, it does play. We're already seeing problems lost in translation between English, Arabic, and Hebrew. The Arabs are telling themselves that its sovereignty is off the map. The Americans are saying, well, he's not going to do it unless we say so. And the Israelis are saying, well, nothing's changed. It's just postponed for now. In the Arab world, in order to have this, we have to remain strong. And one of the keys to that strength, by the way, is dependent on us and our unity. and our unity. We can disagree with each other, but the minute we're going to start hanging our dirty laundry outside, this is a problem. It is the weak link of a chain, and it can make problems for us. As long as we have leaders that will show it, we are a strong people. When we are together, Harold said, you know, we're tiny, but we are a powerful nation. And as long as we do that, we can have peace in this region. And if that means sometimes acting not in a nice little Western way of defunding police or whatever, saying, I'm sorry, I can't hold you down, that's the way it is. It's a different neighborhood here. And I hope that people watching who do not live here understand that.
So based on what you're saying, and both of you are saying, which I agree with, is that Hashem oz la'amo yiten, Hashem yivarech amo v'shalom, to translate, God will make his people strong, God will give his people peace, all right? That nobody's going to love us just for who we are and how sweet we are, but if we're strong and we're respected, then that'll be an absence of war, and that's fine too.
Eve, I want to stop you in a second on what you said, if we are respected, because this goes back personally in a sense that when I had to deal with during the Intifada and so on.
Please.
Yes, you're right. My experience during the Intifada, I dealt with more terrorism than any human in the world should ever have to deal with. One of the main things that I learned was respect. Respect even to those who are trying to kill me. Doesn't mean that I have to agree with it. There were times that I personally never had to, I wouldn't shoot in the air. That would be a sign of weakness in a sense. And it also meant that I did not draw my pistol right away. As long as I stood up and showed them that I had that respect, but showed them that I'm not lacking fear, this is what brought about quiet. It's a very, very different dynamic to understand, because sometimes people are quick to be afraid and jump the gun, if you will, literally. Mm-hmm. And these, again, it's very important for us to maintain that, to have this quiet. And I think that even if we show strength against if they bring up their violence from Judea and Samaria, the Arabs and Gaza, if we hit them and hit them hard and say, there's going to be peace here, and then we're going to make things good, we'll get a very different result than just playing pussyfooting around. Of course, I feel sorry for the UAE and the other people who are going to have to work the spin with their own people.
Or they can say that they can break this normalization because...
I don't think they're going to want to, because as Harold mentioned, they're not big fans of the Palestinians. Their nations, if you follow the Arabic news and the talk shows over there, they're saying, geez, what have we gotten out of this? We've been spending money and money and money, and these people, instead of improving their communities, their areas, their agriculture, they've been wasting it on violence. The Arab mindset
or their
is
leadership
business.
Is stolen it. Or their leadership.
No, but they're looking into business. They're looking to improve. They say, what would it be wasting our mind? We could have been doing much better for our own people by working with Israel, which would have given them power, making their lifestyle better, and it would have worked out. And their people are really sick of it. And this is working out good for us. Again, as long as we make sure that we say we're here and we're here to stay.
So
Mark, you should tell your story about you in the cold water with your neighbors, giving cold water, because it illustrates what you have to do that they understand who has power. Please.
Okay. Back during this happened during the Intifada years. We have olive picking every season, and it's a very tense time for the communities because the army allows the Arabs to come up close to the communities, where a lot of times they are gathering intelligence and whatever, but it's a very, very tense time. So up in Shiloh, that was happening, and there are various families right on our perimeter. And I decided to take bottles of cold water and bring them to each of the families.
To the farmers.
To the Arab farmers.
farmers.
To the Arab farmers. They're out there and so on. And I start coming around in my Jeep, and I'm bringing them cold water, and I tfaddal, tashrab, take, drink. And this, and I finally get to one family. Now, a lot of these people aren't necessarily my fans. And I finally get to one family who happened to be a Hamas family, and he looks at me and he says, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? So I spoke to him. I said, if I come into your house on a hot day, you won't offer me something cold to drink? And he said, of course I will. I said, you're in my house now. Now, it sounds simple, but it's not. By me showing him that respect and stating, you're in my house, it goes far.
Mm-hmm.
And even though one of the people in that family actually took out a contract to kill me, but that's another story.
Maybe he wanted Coke and not water. But in all seriousness, just to throw in, because there is another opinion here, with all the excitement and joy, and there was a very interesting editorial about how the major Jewish organizations in the United States, even the ones who are most definitely solidly on the right, let's say like ZOA, have come out very happily, very enthusiastically for this agreement. But there are some people who are saying, kind of based on what you just said about the Arabs, where's our honor, right? And you mentioned that before. Where, if we are willing for a normalization or for a trade agreement to not apply Israeli law, and if you're interested in all the nuances between annexation, sovereignty, and Israeli law, watch a couple of webinars back because we got into it extensively. I'm not going to repeat it. But if we have the heart of our homeland, right, the places that we came from, and I'm not even just talking about ideology in terms of the greater land of Israel, which is of course incredibly important to many of us. This is our patrimony, and these are the places that we have the right to be in. But also in terms of strength, in terms of, you know, if you apply Israeli law here, then it's a different situation in these areas. Even on a physical, on a security level, Israel could do different things. So there are those who will say that maybe in the Arab mind, we have shown a lack of self-respect. That we understand where they're coming from. I'm just being devil's advocate.
No, I understand. I understand. That's what they're seeing. You know what they say? Okay, and I understand that point. And a lot of us need that that boost of self-confidence to hear our leaders saying, "This is how we're going to apply land." I first of all, anyone who's looking at that, I suggest that they get in touch with Harold and take a course in Islam and Muslim relations to understand. Yes. But the simple fact is like this, okay? And yes, I'm not I don't support the Trump plan. I want it all. I want it all. I wanted to say, no, that's it. This is all ours. Finished. Move on.
Not create a Palestinian state.
No such. No. Not going to happen. I don't believe in it. That's the way it has to be. And I believe that would actually bring peace. Because then I know what I can offer my Arab neighbors, and that's what they would want, and it'll be fine. But we're not going to get into that now. They see us driving around. We're building the roads. My God, they put a traffic light at the Shiloh Junction. Who's in control here? Now, maybe not 100%. Maybe there are problems. Who's on the border? Who's got the military? They know that if we want, and this would be a country thing, we crush any opposition rather than playing the politics. They know we're here. They know the lies that their leaders have said. They know our holy places. Every time some imam gets up and says that there's never a Jewish temple, secretly they're going, man, what a schmuck, okay? They know this, but it is an Arab game. And the fact if we're not declaring our sovereignty now, let's see the way things go. Things take time. Things are patient. I know we have a lot of our people saying, no, right now, and we're hearing that from the settler community. Let's see. This is the Middle East. Things work different. If all of a sudden you start seeing again the possibility of these real peaceful relations developing, I think the people that will ask Israel to declare sovereignty will be the Arabs and not even the Jews, because they know where it will get them. And a lot of people out there making comments in English in the States and so on, when's the last time they sat in an Arab coffee shop? Not in a university speaking to one of these fake, I'll use the word, one of these fake Arabs who's trying to be Western. How much do they really know the Arabic culture? How much do they appreciate it? Very different scene. So we have to be patient and see, not to freak out.
So I have a question from Harold.
Can I also please, if you don't respond to this, first of all, from the Jewish point of view, look, God made it clear in the Bible. He gave this land to the Jews. And since God created the whole world, he can do what he wants to it. That is in the book of Genesis. So there's no the only idea. Jews waited for 2,000 years and got their state. So Jews can't wait a little longer on the sovereignty issue. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. It's genius what the Israeli leadership did here.
So we've got a question from someone who's watching about Turkey. And Harold, I'm going to pose this question to you because that is one of your areas of expertise. Why does Turkey think that the agreement will harm its interests?
Please. You have many internal battles in the Muslim world. It is the Wahhabis and, let's say, normative Sunnis, in this case on one side, versus the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, the difference, I think I had mentioned before, Wahhabis say you deserve whatever you're getting from the leaders because you're not doing Allah's will. The Muslim Brother has a different view, is that all of these leaders, these Arab leaders, these Muslim leaders are working with the West. That is khiyana in Arabic, khiyanet in Turkish, same real word, it means traitorship. You're a traitor, and the punishment for being a traitor is death. Erdogan and Qatar and Iran are all on the same side here, and that involves some parts of Syria, if there is even a Syria today. They see this agreement that the UAE, which is Sunni, and they're Sunnis, as against what they want, and Erdogan in the end wants to be the caliph, the ruler of the entire Muslim world. And what the Gulfis are doing, working with the Israelis, is a terrible thing. And please, one other thing. The Saudis control the only two holy cities from a Sunni point of view in the world. That's Mecca and Medina. Jerusalem is a fake thing. The Wahhabis, their godfather, shows historically that Jerusalem was an attempt by the Jews who converted to Islam to Judaify Islam. Jerusalem is not holy. That's what the Saudis think. The Muslim Brotherhood, which was founded in Egypt in the 1920s, says they had no holy place. Egypt is nothing, but the only thing which was close to them was Jerusalem. And that's why they're interested. Erdogan, what he's doing in the old city of Jerusalem is terrible. I don't understand why the Israelis have allowed this. Basically to try to take over from the Jordanians and everybody else in the old city and among the in Yehuda v'Shamron, among the Muslims. Get them out. Erdogan he's a horrible human being who simply wants to run not only the whole Muslim world, but eventually the whole world. And all three of us here are Jews. Now, we're eventually going to convert to Islam, and then supposedly we're all going to be the same, except don't worry, we'll fight each other then. And as Muslims, unlike what we do historically as Jews very rarely, God forbid, kill each other. We have done this in history, and we have Tisha B'Av where we worry about it, baseless hating each other. But in the Muslims world, when they hate each other, they go in for the kill. That's Syria. That's Iraq. That's what the Iranians are doing in Iran. That's what's going on in Yemen. We could go on, and it's going on among the Palestinians. The real hatred they have is for each other. Our job is to watch, not to get involved in all of this. Let them take care of their own internal battles as long as it doesn't affect Israel or the United States.
So one last question for both of you. Mark and I are sitting in Israel. Harold is in the United States for now, but very involved in what's happening in Israel. Is this just a regional issue here? Israel and our very motley assorted crew of neighbors, or is this has already started going around the world? You talk about Turkey, you talk about Erdogan essentially wanting the Ottoman Empire back as a starting.
Has what started going around the world?
This jihad, what Harold was talking about before, this game, if you will, of making temporary agreements just to kind of fill in what you need for now, but nothing's really permanent. In the Western world, when you sign a peace agreement, it's usually understood that it's a peace agreement and it's going to take a lot for that to break apart. But what both of you have said is that we have to be wary. If we're going to understand the Arab and Muslim mind, we have to know that it's expedience. Okay, so right now, this is handy, it looks good, but at whatever time, if they feel that it's not good for them anymore, Israel's weak or whatever it is, it's done. Is this just right now Israel's problem? Or is that mentality set to really go global? Has it already started in terms of Europe and even, the United States and Australia being infiltrated? Can the world be looking, they might look at this webinar and say, well, that's a nice little discussion between people who care about Israel. But is what we're talking about pertinent to a lot of the people who are watching this who don't live in Israel? Like this particular show is coming your way, and perhaps you can take lessons from the mistakes that Israel has made. For example, let's say leaving Lebanon in 2000, leaving our allies, the Christian Lebanese, behind, and not good things coming out of that. Is this like coming attractions for other people? Mark, maybe you have an answer for that?
Well, first of all, peace agreements in the West. Peace agreements last until someone doesn't agree anymore. It doesn't matter anything. I mean, that's why countries go to war. Oh, they're doing this. They had a peace agreement. Finished. No more peace. People go to war, and then maybe they'll make peace afterwards. I mean, it's just the way it is. I don't think this relates to the rest of the world. We're in our area. First of all, let's see. No agreement has been signed yet. Number one. To remember that nothing's been signed, and there no conditions have been set. And I can't see, even though they say 2 months, maybe they're going to open up the skies and people are going to start flying back and forth without an agreement. I mean, who needs a peace agreement for that matter? So let's see what happens. If you're talking about a world jihad, I mean, any extreme aspect of religion, that's what they want. And it doesn't matter which, I mean, in Judaism, it's a little different. We're not trying to convert the world,
No.
Obviously, in Islam, they have their different ideas. And also Christianity, we have the Crusades back then. And then we have, the Moorish conquering of Europe and whatever. I think the world is definitely, I don't even think you can even start a discussion with like that, because the world's going crazy. It's really, people don't know what they are, where they're going, and so on. And
but in that chaos and mayhem, bad guys can start doing what they.
Yeah, but that's already happening. That's already happening.
So
we're seeing that, and if we're talking about, I mean, there's a lot of, I think one of the things that are common with my being an artist and working working on counter-terror projects and so on. Counter-terror is one of the most creative fields that there is. Actually, you have to really think out of the box if you're going to try to work with this. And we're watching terror of all sorts going on now. Of course, we're seeing Islamic terror is bad in the world. Where, I mean, Europe is inundated. Watching Europe will be interesting again with all their immigrants coming and then seeing what happens. I don't think this sets anything for the world. I think the world will continue, is in a sense, each area respected to its own dynamic.
Okay, Harold, what's your opinion on that?
Well, let me quote a senior leader from the UAE who I saw attending a conference yesterday. It was on Twitter, so I don't really, the context was lost. But a question from a European was, we don't hear the question, we hear his answer. He said, you in Europe think you understand Islam and you think you understand your Muslims. We clearly, and then we don't. We know ourselves better than you do. What you are doing by giving in to them is that you are going to spread fanatic Islam all over the world. You are responsible for that. And these people who say, come, let us reason together, whether it's the American left or the Israeli left, or what's left of the Israeli left, don't get it. It's like this is a global problem. The Israel problem is just one of many. Again, I'm talking from a Muslim point of view. What is important is we have an opportunity here for knitting together this world coalition that, as I mentioned, that Trump and Pompeo were doing, and to put the Palestinians in a situation where, guys, this is your chance. You mess it up, the hell with you. And that is what the UAE side is doing, and in Bahrain and Oman. And please, these are all bellwethers for the Saudis. The Saudis want to do, basically say, the hell with this. This is an old thing. But when many years ago, the late great Senator Scoop Jackson from Washington, many years ago, was on a trip in Saudi Arabia, and a former boss of mine, Richard Pearl at the Pentagon, who had worked for Scoop Jackson at the time, they were there, and Jackson went somewhere, and Richard Pearl was left with a bunch of senior princes, Saudi princes. And they said to him, "We know who you are. You wrote that Zionist speech that Senator Jackson gave last week." And Richard Pearl says, "You're right. I said, but I want to tell you a little bit about the research that I did for this. When I saw in the speech, when I saw what was going on, it made you really, like 90% of the aid that you're giving to the Palestinians is bribe money, so they won't hurt you." And all the princes got very mad and said it's not true and all that. And of course, Richard Pearl held his ground. And towards the end of the conversation, when they were about to all walk out, the senior prince put his hand on Richard Pearl's shoulder and said, "No, you're wrong. It's not 90%. It's 100%.
Wow.
It's bribe money." And the Saudis are looking for a way out. This Mohammed bin Salman has been under the tutelage of Mohammed bin Zayed, who is the ruler of Abu Dhabi, and he has a different view from before. And the view before is, whatever happens to the poor Saudis, they can't go out and do anything. They can't push an agenda. If they do, something may happen to us. Mohammed bin Salman, and I'm not personally a fan of some of the things that he has done, but his response under the tutelage of the head of Abu Dhabi is, no, we have to take the lead and take care of ourselves. And that, if you take now the Israel thing in context, that seems to be the direction that they're moving. Are they going to have an open relationship with Israel? I have no idea. But the fact that they allow Air India to fly from New Delhi right over Saudi territory to Israel, and most likely, though I don't know if it's worked out yet, there's from the Emirates to Israel over Saudi territory is 3 hours. I'm sure that they're all talking about this. Is the Saudis saying, if it works for the rest of you, then we're coming along too. We'll be the last ones, but we'll be there, and that's a great thing.
And the fear of Iran, that kind of common fear.
Every one of these people are petrified of Iran. And all I can say is, from what little I can figure out that Israel is doing in Iran, what it has shown to all the people in the area, that America can be interested or disinterested. Let's say the Biden people or whoever is he's probably a bit demented. So whoever is around them and making the decisions, they came in, they're going to give in to Iran. But Israel is standing strong against Iran. And that strengthens all of the Gulf people and Saudi Arabia. That's a good thing. Israel is strong. It must show that it is strong. That's where the self-respect comes from. You don't try to give in to bad people. You can do what you want, and I will take care of me, and that's the way it is. And the me in this case is Israel. So that's it.
So since you're living in the greater Washington, D.C. area in this very interesting fall of 2020 leading up to the elections, what's your feeling about if there is going to be, let's say Trump loses and Biden becomes president? Do you think that that's going to radically change the relationship of the United States with Israel? as we have.
Let me answer you this. Let me answer you this indirectly. I taught in the summer for 3 years in Ariel University, in the city of Ariel in the Shomron, and I had the reaction of the students was very interesting. In the past, if something went wrong in the United States, in Israel, we're all older. We're not teenagers, 20s, 30s people, the three of us. In the past, the feeling in Israel was, oh my God, what's going to happen to us? That is to the Israelis. My students in Ariel had a very different view. They're mostly 2 and 3 generations, some 4 already in Israel. When things were going bad during the Obama years, America was going a bit crazy under Obama. Instead of saying, oh my God, what's going to happen to us? The students were saying to me, wow, what can we do to help America? Do you realize the self-confidence and all that? It's fantastic. I hope you guys agree with me on this. This is the direction we're going. And if you understand, even if Biden comes in power, Israel is so unbelievably powerful. Can Israel take care of itself? Well, I don't know military stuff. I know culture. But Israel's in a much, much better situation than it was. And if it managed to get through the Obama years, it should be able to get through pretty much of anything.
All right, so you're not that concerned. We'll see what happens.
As they say in Arabic, and I think it's also in Yiddish, frankly, from your mouth, it means in this case my mouth, to God's ears, and we hope she's listening.
But they also say Kul Kalbi Ziomo.
Yeah, every dog's day comes, if you wish that everybody else should, whatever. Okay.
So if our viewers would like to get in touch with either of you, Mark, can they do so? Should they write to me and I'll give them your address?
Yes, let them write to you.
Okay, we'll do that. And Harold, I know you've got a website, Harold-Rhode, RHODE.com.
Like Rhode Island.
Like
yes.
Rhode Island, exactly. And in terms of some of the books, the discussion that we've had tonight didn't really get in depth into a lot of the Arab culture, honor, shame, humiliation, a lot of the things that you have written about extensively, that you lecture on extensively, many things that you learned from your late mentor, Bernard Lewis, and the books that you recommend to people that they read as well. So I know that if anyone is interested in taking you up on that element of your knowledge and of your experience, they can definitely be in touch with you and learn really from one of the masters, who learned from one of the masters.
Thank you. I know how much I need to learn. I'm still learning. I got a lot more to learn now than I did earlier.
Well, that's the sign of an intelligent person, is knowing what we don't know. And I think that it behooves all of us. It's very hard to hear things that we don't agree with. And it seems that in certain parts of the world, people are just not even making the attempt anymore. But it's imperative that we learn what we can about other cultures. We don't have to agree with it. We don't have to adopt it. We can think it's absolutely insane.
We have to
but we
respect
have to know
it.
what they're thinking for our own good. And that is something that you can very much illuminate people on when it comes to the Islamic world, which is a very big part of the culture that we're dealing with right now. So I want to thank you, Dr. Harold Rhode, Marc Provisor, both of you for your perspectives. I know that I learned a lot, and I hope that our viewers did as well. This will be going on our website along with our other webinars, oneisraelfund.com, within the next 24 hours or so. So you can also send it out and do whatever you want with it and watch our other webinars, if you will. During this time of COVID, when as a tour guide, I'm a touristless tour guide here in Israel, so we have not been able to run the tours that we normally do in Judea and Samaria. I know that some of you watching, if it was a normal year, next week you would be on a bus with me and we would be lurching from winery to winery, having our famous wine tour during the height of the grape picking season in the fabulous wineries of the Shomron. So we're gonna have to do that virtually this year, and hopefully we'll do 2 next year to make up for it. But we have been doing virtual tours, maybe 3, 4, who at some point it won't matter anymore. But we have been videoing virtual tours of different communities and the people living in them, and they are also all on our website. And so you're welcome to watch them, and at least, if you're not here, at least feel that you are with us in a certain way until you can get back on a plane and come here physically, because we wait for you. In the meantime, hope that the world gets better on every single level, and that we come back to some kind of normal. I thank you all for watching. Thank One Israel Fund for sponsoring tonight. Eve Harow for One Israel Fund. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much to Shauna for being behind the scenes. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eve.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, all of you.